if you're a Darwinian.
Right.
Right, so that's the problem with modern scientists. It's like, are you Newtonian or are you Darwinian? It's like Newton, he's wrong, by the way. Right, we already know that because Newton's only a subset of Einstein, let's say. And God only knows what the whole quantum thing is going to end up being. We don't even know how to structure our thought in accordance with those presuppositions. But Darwin trumps Newton. That's my hypothesis. So, you know, you might say those who... So then the question is, what attitude towards religion is truly scientific? Right. I think my attitude towards religion is precisely scientific. So, because it's predicated on Darwinian, really on Darwinian presuppositions. Dawkins is a rationalist. He's not a Darwinian. He just thinks he's a Darwinian.
Okay, can we explore this a little bit in terms of describing how you're working with these definitions? When you say that your approach to religion is a Darwinian one, and Dawkins is unwittingly perhaps.
He's an Enlightenment guy.
Right. So
the Enlightenment is like, it's really thin paint on a mile deep piece of rock. It's nothing. One of the things I really liked about reading Jung was that Jung tracks the development of thought, say back 10,000 years. It's like, wow, that's a 10,000 year span of history. That's a long time. It's like, well, not compared to 300 million years. That's a really long time. Okay, so if we're going to talk about the Darwinian underpinnings of the brain, or of the human organism, let's use some time spans. So Dawkins has Darwinism painted on Enlightenment rationality. He's an Enlightenment guy. It's like rationality rules. It's like, this is how you make sense of the world. It's like, okay, well, we've thought that more or less for 400 years. So what did we think for the other, like, 300 million years? How did we manage without that, if it's truth? So it's a form of truth. It's a partial form of truth, and it's a powerful partial form of truth. But to say it's truth, well then, it depends on what you mean by truth. So, yeah, well, and that's where it gets back, and that's where it starts to go back into the Darwinian issue, which is there's only one way you can define truth in relationship to finite beings. It's true enough. True enough for what? True enough so that you survive and reproduce. That's it. You don't get to go any farther. What's more true than that? Sorry, you can't ask that question. That's it. You've hit the limit, and that's basically Darwin's claim. And that's what the pragmatists recognized as well.
So it was another way of, that's really helpful, what you just went through. I think that's going to be very useful. So is another way of articulating that, what's true is what enables you to successfully achieve a goal.
That's what's true enough. Right. Exactly. But there's only true enough. But there's varieties of true enough. So it doesn't turn you into a relativist. It's like some things are only true for one thing. Some things are true for 10 things. Some things are true for 1,000,000 things. It's like, well, that's a better truth. Well, and what the religious imagination, which is the imagination that's concerned with values, is always trying to determine is, well, what's the highest value? That's the religious question. What's the highest value? Which is, what should you serve, let's say, to ensure your viability across the broadest domain of time? Well, we don't know. So what we've done is, well, we've watched successful people. So what does successful mean? Well, we know what it means. We can stay within the Darwinian framework. I mean, I don't think, by the way, I don't think the Darwinian framework is the last word on things, because we're starting to discover, for example, that there are epigenetic transformations. So, you know, we'll see where that goes. It's going to go somewhere very interesting, but that's okay for the time being. We're enamored of successful people, okay? There's a successful person A, there's successful person B, there's successful person C, and what makes them the same is that they're successful. Okay, then the question is, what is successful? Well then, in some sense, the variations of hero mythology are complex answers to that question. It's like, well, if you're a hero, you're successful. Well, there's a bunch of different kinds of heroes. Okay, so you get all these heroes together and have a big fight. Who comes up on top? Well, I can tell you one answer to that, because that's exactly what happens in Mesopotamian mythology. It's like there's a bunch of heroes, they're gods, And then they're confronted by a horrible chaos monster that actually gave birth to them. That's Tiamat. And these gods, they know that singly she'll just claw them to nothing. So they're all freaking out about this. And then at one point, a new god gets born. His name is Marduk. And he's kind of an interesting god because he can speak magic words and he has eyes all the way around his head. So they send out a god now and then to go after Tiamat because she's angry with them for like making too much racket, essentially, and killing her husband. It's not a very good idea. They're careless. They're like 2-year-olds, really. So they throw out a god now and then to go fight Tiamat, but she just wallops them. There's not even any contest. So this Marduk is born and he grows up and they're pretty impressed with him. So they ask him one day, well, how would you like to go out and fight Tiamat? And, you know, maybe he's not too thrilled about that. But he says, okay, I'll do it. But here's the rule. Call a council. You put me in charge. I'm top god. And that means from here on in, I determine destiny. So he's the thing that determines the way the future is going to unfold. And, you know, they're not that happy about that, but they arrange them into a hierarchy and they put him on top. And then he goes out and he catches Tiamat in a net. So he conceptualizes her, so to speak, cuts her into pieces, makes the world out of her. It's like, that's what a human being does. Pays attention to where the chaos is, encapsulates it, cuts it up, makes the world. One of his names was actually, he who makes ingenious things out of the combat with Tiamat. It was actually like a literal name of Marduk. And so the Mesopotamian emperor had to imitate Marduk. So to the degree that he had sovereignty, the reason he had sovereignty was he was a Marduk. So, and then he could be a good Marduk or a bad Marduk. So at the New Year's festival, they'd take the king outside the city, so that's out into chaos. They'd strip him of his kingly clothes, and then they'd make him kneel, and then he had to confess to all the ways that year he hadn't been a very good Marduk. They'd actually hit him with something first. Then he had to confess, well, I wasn't a good Marduk this way or that way, and you know, so he got all his sins out in the open. And then they had a big ceremony with the, like the statues of the gods. They replayed the battle between Marduk and Tiamat, and then there were some other things that happened too, which I won't get into. But then they went back inside and the new year was renewed. So they acted out the eternal battle between attention, say, and embodied attention and chaos. And they realized that reverence for that was the basis for valid authority. Valid authority. And the king had a moral obligation to act in that manner. That's why he got to be king. It's like, brilliant. Now you say, well, are they conscious of this? They're conscious enough to act it out. Right. That's as conscious as they were. They could use their bodies and their collective as a representational mechanism. But they couldn't, you know, and then they could tell stories about it too. But as far as deriving out what that meant philosophically and in a fully articulated way, it's like, no, they couldn't do that.